Shalom, my friends, and I'm so happy I could cry. But don't you cry for me, because we have a wonderful guest in the neighborhood today. He is mostly a filmmaker and a film documentary maker and producer. But the exciting news is that he has his one-man show with music that is going to be at the 92Y Bronfman Center, and it's called Don't Cry for Me, My Yeshiva. Because he's Jewish. In fact, he was Orthodox Jewish, raised Orthodox, but now, his life changed. He realized things about himself, and he's had, let me tell you, a life and career. As a journalist, he covered the Rwandan genocide, which, by the way, kids, that's what a real genocide looks like. And what else? He has, the show that he's going to bring us right now was a MAC nominee for Best Special Production, and he even spent many months in Israel on a kibbutz. So won't you please welcome to the neighborhood, Joe Fox. Shalom, Joe.
Shalom.
Shalom. So let me ask you, were you Haredi Orthodox or modern Orthodox? What were you?
Yeah, no, I was quote unquote modern Orthodox, and there's variations of that translation. But I grew up and my dad was an Orthodox rabbi. I went to a yeshiva growing up, which was considered modern Orthodox. So, we had our feet very firmly planted in both worlds.
Did the world at least when you were growing up as a kid, did it make sense to you? Were you comfortable in that very hermetic sort of environment?
Well, like when you grow up anywhere, you don't really know what the other way is. So, growing up, I felt, I never really questioned that. The other layer to my story is that I'm adopted. So, when you're adopted, you grow up always thinking that, you could be something else, and your life, where did my life start? So as one gets older, one starts to question one's place. Do I belong here? What am I doing here? And that those thoughts never really leave you. But I think, growing up as an Orthodox Jew, I started to question more as I got older, and I started, straying, every teenager has their revolt, their renegade years. So,
I was a revolting teenager myself. I can't even begin to tell you, but yeah.
So, as the years went by, I started to, I started to sneak a little tray food here and there. I started to put my yarmulke in my pocket here and there. So, gradually I kind of I kind of realized that maybe Orthodoxy wasn't quite for me, but until I went off to college, that was kind of the name of the game.
Well, let me ask you, since I did not know you brought up that the invariable question, did you ever track down whom your real,
Yeah.
real, but your birth parents
My
were?
biological. Yeah, I
Yeah.
did. I did. I always had that feeling that I always was going to do that. So I did. I did track her down, and I met her, and that's another story.
Well, is that in the show or is that? Yeah,
It is in the it is in
oh,
the show, because the adoption, my show is about many things. My show is about finding oneself. My show is about, trying to take the pieces that sort of come your way, the disparate pieces, to sort of form your own person. And some pieces don't fit, some pieces fit, and you try to find a way of fitting them all in. It's always a work in progress. So, I did meet her. I did meet my biological mother. And the question you might want to ask, was she Jewish? Yes, but she was, my parents were very insistent upon adopting a Jewish child. Um, and they went through a number of adoptions before, you know, that worked. and so they were very adamant about finding a Jew, finding that the mother was Jewish. So that is in the show because that was a big piece of, you know, who was a big piece of my identity, but it also intersected with my faith. It intersected with my sexuality. There was a lot of things that kind of were, brewing in me, that kind
Well,
of
let me ask
were
then.
at play.
You mentioned your sexuality? You are a gay person. So was that part of the schism, if you will, with sort of a jism schism of leaving Orthodox Jewry, or is Orthodox Jewry accepting that, at least not in the Haredi sect?
Well, no, it wasn't. Not, I mean, I can only speak to my experience. I can't talk in general. I can assume, I am a man of a certain age. So, um, I was I was growing up during the I was born in 1960. So I was hitting adolescence in the 70s, and it was a different, never mind the Orthodox way of looking at homosexuality. It was in general, it was kind of, not considered,
Mm.
the norm, so to speak. But yeah, there's a key point. It was a key point in my life that's illustrated in the show, in which, basically I was berated. We went to see a show about. I was in charge of our Shabbaton, and I chose at 16 to go to see a show that had a very gay theme to it. And our rabbis, excuse me, found out about it, and they called this emergency meeting the next day. And we were berated for a while about the evils of homosexuality. To mind you, I never said out loud or even in a whisper that I was gay, but I kind of knew that I was. I did choose the show. I was leaning in that direction. I was attracted to the rabbis. So, so, that that conversation had a very profound impact on me. I just shut down for like a good while. But I still tried to find my place in Judaism. Judaism always had, no matter what I was feeling, it was always a magnet to me. I always wanted to find a place that I could call my own. And it was a struggle. Like I remember going to a number of Orthodox synagogues, and the rabbi from the pulpit had, very harsh words to say about gay people, calling them deviant. So it took a while before I could, you know, find, a synagogue that was accepting, that I found a way of expressing my Judaism. Just because I'm gay doesn't mean it's not, was diametrically opposed in terms of trying to struggle who I was, but it's not diametrically opposed in terms of expressing one's belief, so it took a while. It was not an easy road.
And you have not dropped Judaism, maybe in terms of religious observance, but not culturally. Obviously, you're doing this one man
Yeah,
show called
I
"Don't Cry for Me, My
haven't.
Yeshiva." Yeah,
I
you're still.
I haven't. I really haven't. I was a member of the board of directors of my local synagogue, not for a while. You know, I still, I'm connected. I'm a member of, a gay synagogue now. Whether or not I go often, that's another
Nobody
story.
goes. You don't
But
have to go. You just have to
but
pay
I'm
the
a
dues. Yeah.
member, I pay my dues, so there's a connection. I observe I observe the majors, so
Oh.
there's still a very strong connection, towards my faith.
So, what made you musical? Not just tell your story in a one man show, as so many people do, but you also, on some level, musicalized it a bit with what song parodies, and I would know nothing about that. But please, what made you turn your life into a musical show?
Well, it's I call it a play with music. So music sort of takes that secondary role. But I think music, I mean, look at what a chazan does. Chazan sings. Why do we sing at our services? Because singing is spiritual. Singing, you could speak the words of prayer, but no, we sing them. Song has a way of liberating you. Song has a way of expression that spoken word can't. So I felt that music had a place in terms of telling my story because I was able to use music as markers and throughout the show to kind of, you know, chapterize it, so to speak. And it allowed me the freedom to do that.
So tell us, what is not to give anything away in the show because we want people to go see it at the 92 NY Bronfman Center on Sunday, June 21st. But for example, what is a story, an anecdote from your life that you tell in the show?
Well, phew, there are many anecdotes. I mean, there are many stories. So, the piece has many layers to it. First of all, it is a show that it's autobiographical. It takes one, it kind of is the story of myself as a gay Jew, was adopted. My dad was an Orthodox rabbi, and my journey in life. But the show is framed around a time that I'm a documentary filmmaker, so it was a time that I spent in Maine, and I was doing a documentary on a same-sex marriage referendum battle, and I got access to both sides of each campaign, but I had to go into the closet to gain access to the side that was against gay marriage. So, part of my story is telling is a how how this experience of having a front row seat to like homophobia, you know, kind of triggered my going back in my life and re-examining and reflecting about what my life was about. But the other part of the story was about connecting. So I had to find a way of connecting to the other side, so to speak, against insurmountable odds. I had to find a common bridge. And the big anecdote that I tell in this story is, the main character of my documentary was a evangelical grandmother from a rural part of Maine who was very, I hate to use the word Bible thumping, but she was very passionate about what her beliefs were. And she sort of led the charge in her area against gay marriage. So I had to find a way of connecting with her because the art of storytelling is really being able to connect with another person and try to get into their heart. So, for example, when I was a reporter for USA Today, I went to Gaza and I had to, look, I am certainly not pro Hamas by any means, but
Good, good. Yeah.
I interviewed, people from who were Hamas, for example. But I had to find a way of, as hard as it was to get into their heart and to feel what they were feeling, or else my role as a storyteller would be diluted. It would not be authentic. So I had to find a connection with this woman, and our connection was Judaism. Our connection was, my faith. Our connection was that my dad was an Orthodox rabbi. She related to that. Our connection was, I told her I was adopted. That kind of softened her because she viewed me as being not gay. She didn't know I was gay. She viewed me as being this New York interloper. Um, and so we formed this bridge. Granted, she didn't know that I was gay, but nonetheless, you know, I she saw me as somewhat human. She related to the Jewish part. I related to her in a way that I was able to sort of see myself and reaffirm my faith in my religion in a way, by seeing her authenticity and seeing how she was a woman of conviction. That led me to question, okay, who am I? so it inadvertently created a sense of pride in my being gay and also by being Jewish. But the anecdote, which is a long-winded way of setting up the story, was that at the end of the election in which we lost that time, we won 3 years later, um, was that she invited me over to her house for dinner and she made me a kosher meal. So I thought, well, okay, that doesn't make her a saint because I had to sit through 3 months of.
And she was a shitty cook. Let's be
No,
honest.
she was not. She was great. But it just shows to Goya that, two things could be true. It shows to Goya that, people are human. It doesn't excuse
Right.
any of her
No, I get.
behavior
And also, it
or
is
her
rather
faith.
surprising to me that this was an initiative in Maine. I can understand it was in Mississippi or somewhere, or
Mm.
Texas, but this was freaking
You know
Maine.
what? Maine, it don't like you go outside New York. We have a weekend house in New Jersey, and where we live, I mean, they've accepted us as gay people, but maybe not. Maybe if we were African American, they wouldn't be so tolerant. So
That's
it's
okay. Nobody accepts people from New Jersey anyway. That's just giving back.
hey. So you know, I wasn't, you live in a bubble when you live in New York. It's like, how could people be this way? And Maine certainly was not top of mind, as being one of, like you say, Mississippi. But it was, Maine is mostly rural. Maine it's very evangelical. Once you get out of Portland, and we lost the first time. So,
Sure,
you know, so there were plenty of people who really had, and also Maine is libertarian. So libertarianism can go swing both ways. Um,
Well,
but
this is a very hard question, but I'm going to ask this question because that's what I do. I'm the gadfly here. Your adoptive, your parents, your mom and dad, how would they have voted?
Oh, well, that's an interesting question. How would they have voted if they didn't know I was gay, or how would they voted if they knew I was gay? So maybe I'd like to think if they knew I was gay, they would have voted for same-sex marriage. If they didn't, they probably would not. But I think once you know of someone in your family, it might change the equation a bit.
Yeah, but you keep talking about, are they still with us?
No, my parents passed away a while ago.
Right. Okay. So did
But
they ever know that you were for real?
mm,
No.
I think parents, especially mothers, I think they always have a sense, but we never had that discussion. So officially speaking, they didn't know.
When did you? And you're married, right? When did you get a husband and all this?
I got my husband in all this when I met him in South Africa. He's from South Africa. And I met him, gosh, when did I meet him? We've been together for like almost 30 years. And we
Oh,
got married.
so
We
so
got
they
married.
never knew. I mean, your parents must have been in 30, or did they pass?
No, my parents passed away when I was 34. And
Yeah. Okay.
so, I didn't come out really till they officially come out till they passed. And then I met my husband Frank for when I was like 46 or so. No, 30, 36. I don't remember, 38.
But his name is Frank. I'm
Whatever.
guessing he might not be Jewish.
He is not Jewish.
Ah, damn it! Oh, well, what
Um,
is he then?
Frank is Methodist. He makes a mean brisket though, just like the Lady of Maine. And it was not that. And what was important for me was to find a person who I loved.
Of course. Absolutely, of course. By the way, we're talking with Joe Fox here in the neighborhood. Joe Fox, you're going to go see him, please, on
Please,
on Sunday evening, June 21st, doing his one-man show with a little bit of music, Don't Cry for Me, My Yeshiva, and that is at the Bronfman Center, we'll call it a YMHA. Just go with me on that. 1395 Lexington Avenue over at 92nd Street. Get your tickets at 92ny.com. Now, we've talked a bit about the theater, of course, but mainly, as you've said, you've been a documentary filmmaker. Tell us about making your very first full-length docu-feature film. I mean, that's the thing. You don't just wake up one day and say, oh, I'm going to make a movie. How did it come about?
Okay. Well, I've always been a journalist and I've always been a storyteller. So, I started out writing stories. And then as time evolved, I wanted to expand my wheelhouse and go into doing documentaries, doing film as a form of storytelling. So the first documentary that I did was on Japanese American internment camps during World War II. And then the second documentary I did was this documentary up in Maine called Question One. And then I went back to doing a third documentary on, again, the subject was on Japanese Americans, but it was how the internment camp affected the generations that followed. It's kind of like the Holocaust in a way, about how Holocaust survivors, how that trauma informs the next generation and
Yeah.
the generation after that. I also do, what pays the bills are doing short little videos for not-for-profits and hospitals, and at the heart, colleges, whatever, and at the heart of all of that is a form of storytelling.
So let's go back to the Japanese internment one, the first one of the. So from the moment you think there's a documentary here to finishing it, the last cut in the editing room, and then realizing you've got to submit it to festivals, and how long is that process? How expensive was that process? Just a little bit of the nuts and bolts of making a movie.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot of work. It's, it on average, like it took me about 2 years to do that film. It took me 3 months to do the film up in Maine because I was following it in real time for a campaign. It was a 3-month campaign, so that dictated the length of filming. So it really varies. I think the big labor is on the back end, which then becomes the front end of, going through all the interviews and kind of shaping the story. So, kind of about a year to do that. And then you know the the other big piece that comes afterwards is promoting it. So that was also, it's really like pushing a boulder, really, of trying to get it out and trying to get people to pay attention to it. But at the end, hopefully you make something that people will want to see and that has some meaning.
So you have to make the movie first before it gets distributed, and of course. But in terms, do grant funding? I mean, or you have a company where
I
to
have a
make?
company, so my
Yeah.
company is called Fly on the Wall Productions. And we mostly self-fund the movies that we make. So, the revenue that we get from our jobs go into our commission work
Right.
goes
Yeah.
into making documentaries. Um, I mean, going out for grants is a whole other, you
Sure.
know, uh, Michigas. Um, so pretty much self-funded. And then, at the end of the day, you hopefully make some of that money back through whatever.
But essentially, you're not robbing Peter to pay Paul, but you're doing the not commercials, but you're doing the short films for college, and then
I
whatever
mean,
extra money goes into a fund
pretty,
that then.
pretty,
Yeah.
pretty,
Yeah.
pretty, pretty much. Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right. So,
Got
are you
that.
working on a documentary project? Yeah, a new one?
Sometimes my work is connected to there's overlap. So I just meaning that I do a lot of work for a big hospital in New York. So some of what they do is documentary worthy. So like a year or two, like 2 years ago, I did a film about the first AIDS clinic in New York City, but it was done through it was found it was established by this hospital I worked for. So there was some synergy as it relates to that.
Cool. All right. We're talking, by the way, with Joe Fox, reminding you about that. And you were also a journalist for a period of time leading up to.
No end to these talents, right?
Well, tell us about actually physically being in Rwanda.
Well, it was 6 months after the genocide, and this was really my first big foray into journalism, so to speak. I did do journalism, but not I wrote articles, but it certainly was not on the scale of going to Rwanda. So I don't know. I never thought of it as being, I was fearless. I mean, I just knew what I had to do and I lined up my stories and I was able to, I never really thought of it as being daunting at all. Maybe now I would, but I think when you're younger, like I was just going to do it. So, I
And you did mention this was six months
hopped on a plane.
after.
It was. So
Yeah.
I never thought like people would say, "Oh, was it dangerous? How were you think?" No, it really, I mean, I had a few dangerous experiences, but I just rolled with that. I knew, I don't know, I've always been the type that kind of, you know, put my nose to the grindstone and kind of just set my sights to do something. And I usually just do it.
Was there ever a moment that was shocking, surprising? You felt fear, exhilaration, anything in that experience?
There was. I mean, I was once like our bus was attacked I was in a refugee camp and they were chasing somebody and the person jumped into our van and our van got surrounded and they rocked it back and forth and I thought I was going to die then. But I didn't. Um, but I was just exhilarated that I was able to kind of get to the finish line, which is what I did when I was up in Maine. That was all that was the only thing in my mind was just to get to the finish line, to get to the end of this campaign and not be outed and, you know,
Right.
and just, and just to survive until the end.
I mean, you were basically doing a non-comic Borat or Bruno in a certain
It
way.
was more like kind of. I always describe it as like Nathan Lane from The Birdcage meets um Ava Gabor in Green Acres in terms
Huh.
of what I was, kind of how I tried to, how I passed, I do not know, but I did. So that's the story.
Now, speaking of stories, you also and even though you haven't done a lot of theater work per se, you did a fairly major theater project out in Los Angeles that now I'm going to mention Anna Devere Smith, but there's a connection there in terms of the L.A. riots. So
I
what was
did,
that? Yeah.
yeah. Well, I've always been kind of an actor. When I was younger, I did pursue acting as was an aspiration, but that didn't really pan out the way I wanted. But yeah, I was always drawn to sort of documentary theater, which is really capturing the voices of real people and then creating a script that was based on their words. And I was in a very unusual situation in Los Angeles in that I was doing my bread and butter was public relations at that time. And I was working for I was doing public relations for the largest African American church in South Central when the riots broke out. I mean, you look at me, how would that happen? It happened. Um, and so I was in the epicenter of the riots when it occurred, and I wanted to create a piece where I went around Los Angeles and I interviewed people from all sections, all neighborhoods, all backgrounds, and I pieced it together, in a theater piece that got a lot of attention and got, that was presented, that was sponsored by the city of Los Angeles. And
So were you the actor? Were you
I
performing
was
what kind?
one of,
Oh,
I got like, I casted the show. I went into neighborhoods and I didn't cast actors. I casted real people to play the role of the people that I was interviewing. So it was a African American single mother. I found an African American single mother to portray the woman who I interviewed. So I was one of the 24 people um, who who had a role,
yeah.
who acted in it. I was not the star. It was an ensemble piece.
And so, of all the things that of all the documentaries you've done, the PR work, the journalism, the theater now, is there one thing of which you are most proud?
Oh, well, I don't know. I think like, it's funny that you mentioned Pride because, we're heading into Pride Month. We are in Pride Month. Um, I think that, you know, it's not just one thing that I'm proud of. It's just, I think that it's taken me a while, and I express this in my show, to really get to a point of self-acceptance and to get to the point of, you know, kind of being, I'm not the perfect picture, and I'll never will be, but I think I've landed at a place where like I'm good, So like in a general sense, like I'm proud of that. And
Yeah.
then like that, my God, like I'm just fine. And I'm proud.
Yes.
I'm also proud of the show. I'm proud of the fact that I've, taken nothing and made it into something. I didn't singing, it was never in my wheelhouse. Creating a show that was based, on something that happened to me, almost 20 years ago. Create a show that was based on my life and to make it engaging and interesting without spewing vomit on the,
That's what I
it's
do
not
on stage.
a
Ask anybody who's seen
self-indulgent
my
thing,
shows. Yes.
and I
Yeah.
was able to get it to a certain point, and I was able to, I'm able to present it at a cultural iconic place like the 92nd Street Y. So hell yes, I'm definitely proud of that.
Well, we are very, very proud to have had Joe Fox with us in the neighborhood. I'm going to
Oh,
remind you,
just sing it one more time. One more time.
Joe Fox. Yes, I'm
Huh?
not a cousin, but people call me a chazer, which is rather different. But
Well, only if you eat the chazer.
sometimes things.
Okay.
Isn't there a thing on your website that you had like pork just before your bar mitzvah? Did you do that?
God, I did.
I mean, I
I'm,
understand, but yeah.
I'm still here.
Halabai for many, many, many years to come. And but you go see. Don't wait. Go see this man on Sunday evening, June 21st. It's at the 92 NY Bronfman Center over on Lexington Avenue and 92nd Street. Don't cry for me, my yeshiva. 92ny.org is the website. Also, he has a website for his film company. If you want to hire them for your organization, for your shul and or school or whatever it is, it's flywall.com. Fly on the wall picture or productions is your thing. Flywall.com. So the very last question for you is: we do keep coming back to this little musical bit. It's your story that you tell on the stage there. What music is there? Are you singing what prayers?
Well, I'm a bit of a Broadway aficionado, so a lot, as you could tell by the title of my show, "Don't Cry for Me, My Yeshiva," that used to be from "Don't Cry for Me, Argentina." So, a lot of my songs are parodies from shows, and um, and that's kind of what marks Don't cry for me, my yeshiva. The truth is, I never liked you all through my wild days while studying Torah, while fantasizing about Sodom and Gomorrah. So that gives you a sense of, what
I
I
am there. You should all be there hearing more lyrics like this from Joe
and
Fox.
and if you want more information about the show, just go to crymyyeshiva.com.
CryMyYeshiva.com. I'm going there now. Thank you, Joe
Thank
Fox.
you. Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to talk to you.
Shalom to you.
Shalom, and see you soon.